So I wanted to do a little devlog on I guess a current challenge I'm facing with part of this game that I'm trying to put together with some friends, and I figured not only would this be kind of a cool way to get a video up on YouTube, but also just to kind of help me troubleshoot something I'm genuinely debugging right now, which is I think an interesting problem. So we're putting together a role-playing game, and I'm about to play a pretty rough version of it. The graphics and stuff totally suck, but the challenge I'm kind of facing right now is that we have these maps that the player can walk around on, and when the maps load up, they have some placeholders for things to be generated and appear. And then I guess as we transition from one map to the next, I need to be able to carry some game state to the next map. So as an example, I guess the primary concern is like the player, right? So as the player is placed onto a map, I need to make sure that that player exists on the map, but as he goes to the next map, that this player's state is realized, right? So if you pick up items or you do something on a particular map and you go to the next one, you shouldn't just have a whole brand new player. You should have the same player you've been working with. So I'm gonna press play. Do keep in mind graphics are rough. It's still there's a lot of stuff sort of in the game engine behind the scenes, but we don't have much in Unity, so it looks pretty trashy. Um, so you'll see there's a couple ugly things going on, but what just happened was when we started the game, we were able to load up a map file from we're right now we're using this TMX open map like tile map format. It's just a I guess an interim kind of thing. We haven't designed actually how we want to store things, but this kind of got us going. Um, and when we load up the TMX, it has some placeholders for different things. So first is I guess all the tiles that you kind of see in the game world here. Um, these are all kind of placed in this TMX file. And then where you see all these kind of ridiculous colors, squares, this information is also defined in the TMX file, so kind of defined per map. And these are actually just placeholders, and it's like when we're in the game debugging things, it's really nice to visualize where these transparent things are. So those get generated from the map, and even it's probably not the right way, but just for testing, the player is actually defined as part of the map. The unique thing about this, and by the way, this is it's placeholder rain coming down. I know it looks terrible. We just wanted to prove that we could have weather that changes in the game. So apologies for what that looks like, but it's pretty low quality. So anyway, the like generally how this works is that we want to have the map have I guess like we call them like spawners. So things like a region or a point that will spawn other content, and this is because we want to be able to dynamically create things for the most part, right? So if you imagine that as an example, you show up on this map and you go, oh look, there's a chest over here. We want to be able to have some type of procedural generation, some type of randomization where you can go to that chest and it will give you random loot. So we need to be able to place a chest. We need to be able to let that generate things. Um, Maybe instead of placing the chest directly, we would place something like a spawner that could spawn a chest, or it could spawn maybe on the ground instead of a chest. You could have a particular item that you could pick up. But anyway, the spawner is essentially like a concept that will allow us to like create a new instance of something on the map. Kind of conversely to that, we have this concept of templates. And actually, this chest is a particular template. So instead of this being defined on the map as its own unique instance of this chest, it's actually defined on the map such that it is a template. When we load this map, if we come across templates defined on the map, we replace, like as we load the map into memory, anything that's a template, we kind of create a new instance of that object from the template. This just gives us a shortcut for kind of predefining certain properties. So as an example, this chest, we use this particular animation for this chest. Um, it's not currently supported, but if we wanted to say like spawn a locked chest that is wooden with metal on it, like we could use that as a template. If you're used to Unity, this is kind of similar to a prefab. We just do a lot of behind the scenes work that Unity kind of does for you, but we do it so that it's Unity agnostic. So just to kind of reiterate quickly, something like this chest that we have in the game is made from a template. We have spawners that can place content into the game world, and then also like this player. Actually, the player right now is a template, so also a bad example. But you can have like technically unique identifiers for an actual saved instance of something. But this is kind of it's not really supported yet, and that's kind of this next challenge that I'm working through. So really, what we're trying to do is get like the base flow of having a combat scene, progress, end, and then you kind of go on to the next map. So this works just like Pokemon. I have this big red box down here, and this red box is going to allow us to enter an encounter randomly. So it's like long grass in Pokemon. You just walk around on it. Just to start, we have randomized encounters. Um, I can walk around on this. Yes, the player is behind. It really doesn't matter. We're just using it as a placeholder. Um, and you can see that randomly I ended up going into this encounter. So we've joined a new map. Yes, it looks identical because I just copied and pasted it, but what you'll notice is where we used to have these magenta squares, we actually have skeletons that have spawned, right? So there used to be a bunch of magenta squares. I as in the player here, was placed at one of those magenta squares. And then these skeletons, three of them were spawned at over top of these other magenta squares. So the magenta squares are actually spawn locations, right? So that's kind of what I was getting at with the spawners. So these spawners were configured such that they could have a skeleton appear, and those skeletons are created from a template. But now that they're created, each of these skeletons is its own unique object, right? So they were created from a template, so we could copy some settings, but they're all their own unique objects. So as an example, this skeleton that I'm highlighting right now might have ID A, this one might have ID B, this one might have ID C. My player has its own unique identifier, and that's all great. So what we want to be able to do is have combat progress. Right now it's pretty busted, so if I try to progress it, technically I can't ever win this fight. The skeletons will kill me. But if I could win, what we want to be able to do is, allow the player to exit the combat. We call them encounters, so they can exit the encounter, and then we want to put them back on the map that they were walking around on before. And the challenge is that as we transition between these maps, our game objects are only stored, like once they become their own unique object from the template, they're only stored on the map. So it's a little bit hard to conceptualize, especially just because I'm pointing at some squares with some skeletons and a little dude on it. So I'm going to end up drawing a picture in Paint in a second here, but the challenge is that once we create things from a template, we don't have a good way to kind of to persist that information from map to map. So I'm going to kind of talk about my initial idea. Again, this is literally a problem I'm trying to solve right now, so I don't have a solution for it. But I'm going to kind of walk through what I think might be a reasonable approach to this. Talk about something I actually don't really like about it, and maybe as I'm going through that, I'll come up with another idea. But anyway, that's kind of the gist of what happens on here. And again, the thing we're trying to solve is that I want my character to have some state, and as he goes from map to map, I want that state to persist. Sounds pretty simple, I guess, on the surface if you're thinking about, oh, there's only this one player that you want to have some state persist. Technically, we're trying to make it generic so that any game object can technically move between maps. We do plan on having this be party-based, So you could have, we don't know how many yet, but say you have 4 actual characters. That's already 4 game objects that are player controlled that we need state to persist between maps. So really just coming up with a generic framework that lets us, go from loading up templates to having unique instances to kind of persisting that to use on other maps. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to try to draw something in Paint here. And we'll see what I can come up with. So my drawing is not so great, but I'll kind of walk through it. And I'm probably going to flip back and forth here between Paint and Visual Studio so I can double check that, I want to be able to kind of illustrate the things I'm looking at. I'm losing my cursor here because my monitor is pretty big. Okay, so what I want to do, let's see if I can get a slightly larger brush here. That's not, there we go. So what I want to do is kind of draw some of the things going on. So right now what's happening is we have a TMX file, and that's what our map is, right? That's what I was saying. So that's a map. We have this TMX file, and within the TMX file, not only do we have all of our tiles and stuff listed, but we have some spawners or templates for objects generally. Ideally, they are spawners so we can be dynamic as possible, but you could imagine that we might have say a particular town or something. It's always going to be structured the same, but we want some things to be dynamically created. So generally, we have templates or spawners. So I'm going to put, T1, T2. That is a 2. I know it doesn't look like it, but trust me, it is. There, that's a 3. So we're going to have this TMX map. This is sort of persisted on disk. That's how we define the maps. And just to show you one quickly, I'm going to pull up our game code here. There's a lot of stuff going on. Like I said, there's a lot actually happening in the game. This is only one of the solutions. It has 58 projects. I think the other one has 100. And that's not even Unity stuff. So kind of going to jump to the content here. Going to open up one of these maps. This is a TMX map format, so it's kind of weird to look at with your, like, to read. You're supposed to use a tool for it. But if I jump to the bottom, you can see that I have this section where there's these game objects defined. Right, so the stuff we're interested in, here's the player as an example. You can see that it has a template ID called player. As I mentioned, this one's a bit of a poor example. The reason why is that we don't want to load a map and create a player from a template. We probably want to go through some character creation kind of stuff. But anyway, this is just kind of for testing. There's a bunch of static game objects that are just walls. So they're invisible colliders. The template that they use is literally just called wall. It's invisible. These names will change and stuff, but this is kind of so that we can do collisions and stuff on the map. You can see that that chest I was talking about is defined here, right? And then we're going to want to have things like spawners. So I kind of lied when I said that those things before were spawners. They're actually spawn locations. So you can see here those magenta tiles are actually called encounter spawn as a template ID. So those are locations that the enemies and the player and player's teammates can spawn at. So as we're loading up that map, we can kind of place things. Anyway, here's the TMX map format. Just wanted to kind of give you a quick look at what this is. Right now, this is the format we support, but like I said, we're probably going to switch it to something else. It's pretty heavy to have that simple map has 20,000 lines. We'll probably make our own map editor in Unity, but anyway. So we have the TMX map file, and basically what's happening is that when we want to load something, so we want to switch a map. I'm not going to type or write everything out. So we want to switch a map. I should probably switch to that text box. When we want to do that, what we're actually doing is we ask for all this data, we pull it all in, and so we're kind of pointing at which map it is. So quickly, right? So we ask for a map ID, and then we're going to read in all this data. And as we do that, we're going to build the map tiles out. So that's kind of like the grass and that weird looking water that you probably saw. So we layer all that out, and then we're going to load the game objects in. And that loading of the game objects, if I just flip back to the Visual Studio really quick, that's this section, this where it says object group, right? So the way we handle that is that we have we use the facade pattern a lot. So we have a facade that has, it's basically like a repository and a facade put together, or a factory and a facade put together, I guess. And based on the type of template, we have different things that can handle that. So I'll use the player as an example, right? You can see that it has template ID player. If I go to actor template repository, this is all kind of injected behavior into here, but actually this one we want a little bit more extreme, so I need to actually go to the player factory, player template repository, sorry. Yeah, so I was starting to code up some stuff here, and then I figured I'd make a video about it, so ignore this for now. We'll come back to it. We have a player template repository. It is able to handle the template called player, which, like we saw, right, that says player for the template ID. And then from there, not to explain everything that's kind of going on up here, but we create a player object. It's a new instance of one. We're not going to a database to do anything. We're not reading it from other files. We're kind of just setting up a player, placing him on the world here, and that's it. But now, by doing that, we've created a new instance of a player. And if you can think about this for a second, anytime we go to this map, so I'm just going to write this. Currently, this includes the player, right? So if you think about that, we end up going from, we've made, maybe I shouldn't use a square for that. I don't know, like a circle. Like this is some action we're doing. So we're going to pull this stuff in, and then what we end up getting, I'm going to draw it back this way. Why did I do that? I don't want a line. Give me my brush. Sorry. Yeah, so we're going to do all that stuff, and then technically, so this was on disk, like I mentioned. This part is going to be in memory. We have a map, and then we actually have, now we have the tiles that you can see. There are no spawners, right? Because by doing this action here, this circle, this is where we're taking templates and spawners and everything and making them instances. So there's no spawners, no templates, and then it has, I guess, like object instances, right? So this is why this is a little bit tricky, and I kind of try to put it all together pretty quickly here. So anytime that we get, we load up a map, we've created these instances. Now, anything that happens in the game while it's running that mutates these instances. So as an example, I mentioned like if the player picks up loot, or you level up your character, the player has some state that changes. If we go to the next map, and say the next map just happens to look like this one over here, right? If it happens to be this map, all that we're going to do is blow this part away. We're going to go do this whole process again and create new instances of all those objects. And the reason why is because we're going to be going from templates and spawners and regenerating all that stuff. So I actually need to come up with a way that says after we've created some of these things, so we've created the player, or like when you saw that I created the skeletons, that's a poor example because that's only in combat, but the chest, right? If I wanted to dynamically create the chest that we were able to see in the game, um, I need to come up with a way that I can say the next time I come back to this map, I want that particular chest to be there. With the player, I want to say, here's, we've created an instance of the player. I need that player to persist through um, the, the different maps that we're going to. Um, but currently we can't because the only spot that we get data from is on these maps. Which has been useful so far, but when you actually want to start playing the game and building upon it, that's kind of the bottleneck right now that I'm dealing with. So, I kind of left out like how does this part work? Just use a different color. Like I just said, it happens. I mentioned there's a repository, or I guess a factory in this case, and like a facade pattern. So we quickly looked at one of the facades. Sorry, one of the things behind the facade, calling it a template repository. Uh, the names are a little bit in flux right now. You'll notice, like I mentioned, I just added this. This should actually be like player template factory now, because it's not actually getting anything from like persisted. Anyway, that's just a quick renaming thing that was happening. Like I said, I'm in the middle of it, so um, because we're pulling everything from this TMX file right now, and using a factory to create new instances of things every time, I need to find a way to get that to persist. So the current idea that I have, and not totally sold on it and haven't totally figured it out, but when we go between maps, I want to, like, the first thing that came to mind is like I need to persist this. So when I say the word persist, the first thing that I think of is like I got to write this to disk. And I was like, on the surface, that seems like, I think, kind of crappy. I just made this map. I don't even know if like, does the player want this information to be saved to their game? Like, what if they haven't saved and they want to, reload? And I've gone ahead and I've saved this map information out. And where do I save it, right? Do I go overwrite this TMX map? Probably not, because that's game content. And I probably need to, anything I'm saving to disk, I need to find a spot to put it. I need to make that part of like the player's save game. So we have none of that right now. But the first thing was like I need to persist it and I should write it to disk. So um, then I was like, okay, like that feels a little bit like overkill. There's a lot of things we haven't figured out yet for what type of storage we want to use. There's a whole lot to think through on that, how we want to serialize certain things. So I was thinking, okay, if let's say that's the direction we want to go, we need to be able to persist stuff. And I don't know how deep I want to go on that yet. My thought was, well, what if I take these object instances that we see here, right? What if I can take those, and when we switch maps, I can, I'm going to use air quotes, I save them out. And by save, I mean I'm just going to put them in a dictionary keyed by their type and their identifier. Technically, the identifier we would like it to be, like a GUID or something, like something that's globally unique. It's not enforced right now, so it has to be unique at least for the type of object that it is. But anyway, we'd key it in a dictionary by its identifier, and then when we want to load it, um, we would basically just go to the cache in memory, like basically cut out the whole convoluted part that I haven't figured out of how we want to persist it to disk, and just use a in-memory cache, like a dictionary. So what that kind of looks like, let me get rid of that there. What that kind of looks like is then we want to do this switch map thing again, right? So I'm gonna get rid of that, and we want to do this action to switch map. I just wanted to redraw it. I don't even know how I want to draw this yet. But when we switch a map, because in the initial state, like technically I didn't have a map open, but I want to kind of reuse this. So if we have a map already open and we want to switch, what that's going to look like is I need to tell this, give me all of your object instances. Maybe I'll use a different color for this. So this is going to ask this thing, give me all of your object instances, right? We're going to take those back out. I'm going to put them into a, really just like it's a dictionary. Right? So I'm going to put them into this dictionary of objects by their ID. And then I would proceed with the loading of the map file. And I guess that's it's as far as I got, really. And it already kind of falls down because when we go to load this map file, like right now, I mean, up until like a couple hours ago, basically, I was reloading this same map file and just generating skeletons on it. But it's the same map file, so I can kind of use it for this example just to prove a point that when I go to load this map now, sure, I might have cached all of these things in this dictionary, right? So that was great. But when I go to load from this map file, the map itself was never saved, right? So I say switch map, and I'm going to put in map ID A again. Say this was A to begin with, right? It's going to go ahead and go do all this stuff again and do all the template and spawner conversions. And it's not going to know to pull from here. So I feel like what I need to do, and I'm literally thinking of this on the fly right now, so I haven't fully thought through this idea, is that if I'm going to cache out these game objects, pretending like, it's going to make it look like it's saved to disk, but just while it's running. So I've cached these game objects. Maybe what I need to do as well is actually cache like some type of object lookup for this map, right? Because the tiles themselves aren't going to change. I'm just going to jump back to Visual Studio here so I can point at this map file. Like, the 20,000 lines above here, they're not going to change, right? That's all going to be the same, and really, I deleted just to make it easier to read, but really, it's this stuff here. So maybe what I need to do is when you load up a map and you want to transition away, what I'll do is anything that is like a game object like this that gets created from a template now has a unique ID associated with it. Maybe at that point, I'll have another lookup that's like when you go to load this map, you'll say, hey, like, does this other overridden game object table already exist for this? If so, use that instead. I kind of like that, actually. So what that looks like is not only when we say switch map do we write out these, or we not write out, we literally store this dictionary of game objects. Maybe at the same time, we say, maybe I shouldn't draw that. We go make another lookup here, and this is for the map A. Yeah, like I don't even, is it just IDs that I need? Because all these things are going to have a world location associated with them. So yeah, like maybe that's all it is, right? So let me just get this back here. So we go write this out, right? So we write that, and then the next step, I'm going to use green now, is we say we want to load map, right? So this is going to be a circle because it's an action. Um, yeah, I know this isn't proper convention for anything, and I'm using paint to try and draw a bunch of lines here, so bear with me. So now that we're switching the map, we're gonna write out. I say write, but we're gonna store this information. Right now it's just in memory, but some other tables that we can look up, and then we're going to switch the map. And when we switch, um, what we can do is say, oh, you want map A, right? Okay, so like, have we come across I shouldn't have done that. We'll say map A, and then we'll say, hey, look, does it have a lookup in here? Oh, it does. So like we'll use this instead. We're not going to use um, the templates, and basically, I'm going to jump back to Visual Studio here. We're not going to use this, the predefined stuff in the TMX file. And why? It's because we've already been to this map. It already, like, technically the map is going to have some state. What I'm trying to kind of suggest here is that once we've been on the map, if you want to go back to the map, you don't need this stuff. You actually want the stuff that I'm, talking about written out over here. So you don't use that. You want to use this. So we'd pull all the tiles, right? The tiles don't change. We pull all the static stuff off the map, and then what we would do is basically load. So I didn't draw this properly, but you'd pull, right? So I'm just going to write, what we're doing is pulling tiles from TMX objects and objects from cache. So that's a little bit convoluted. And if instead of switching maps, we went to map B, just to kind of show you, that's funny, I picked blue because I said B. Yeah, so just to show you a different example here. So if when we go to switch map, if we're not going back to A, which we've already been on, and say we're doing B, we would go here to check, hey, like, do you have a lookup already? And like, no, it doesn't. So then we have to go, I guess, all the way back up to the T. That's a terrible line. So no, it doesn't. We would go all the way back up, and essentially what happens is we need to load all tiles from, and then do templates and spawners, right? Because B had never actually been loaded up. It doesn't actually have this information available. We have to go back to the definition of map B, which is in the TMX file. So I kind of like this. I think that if I can put the proper APIs around these red boxes I drew, if I can put the proper APIs there, then I can figure out when it makes sense to persist, right? So what I mean by that is, I kind of mentioned earlier, like, what if the player doesn't want to save the game? They don't want their save state to kind of persist to disk. They kind of want to blow away their save and restart where they last saved, that kind of thing. If I put some decent APIs around these red boxes here, we can basically decide, like, persisting does not necessarily mean part of the player's save game. We might want to persist some stuff just because we have too much in memory. It might make sense to have a almost like temp files or something, right? So all the game objects and stuff that are loaded up, maybe we write them to disk temporarily, and then when the player saves, we take that stuff that's on disk plus whatever's currently in memory, we mash it all together and make it part of the player's save game. That's down the line. It's definitely coming. It has to happen at some point to have saving and loading, but kind of what I wanted to get across here is, like, does this solve the problem of going from map to map and allowing some type of persistence? And I think it does, because this gives us an option to check it's basically a cache, but the API wouldn't necessarily be like to call it a cache. It would just be like a lookup of some sort. But yeah, we can say we've already been to this map. It's already had stuff transformed, right? Generated, spawned. So don't go to the TMX. Just go to what we have here. It just so happens the first implementation is going to be, in memory, in dictionaries. So anyway, I think that's going to work. That'll be nice to basically go from, walking around. I don't know if the sound's gonna play. I don't want this. The sound's really noisy. We did some. I say we. My friend did some really cool procedural generation for sounds, but they're all totally random and they all happen when we collide with containers. Um, so when I go to this chest, I was able to find a bunch of loot. So as I mentioned, I'm changing the state of the player, right? Like he has items on him. I just made a socket pattern, so like it's kind of like Diablo 2 rune word. So he has some state associated with him, and even furthermore, I'm gonna go drop this armor on the ground, right? So by doing that, I've changed the state of the map, I've changed the state of my player, and what I'm suggesting is, like, you can see that the player has items in his inventory. I don't know, I was going to use the cheat code to start combat, but I'll just walk around. So what you'll see is when I get into combat here, I don't have any of that. And the reason I don't have any of that is because none of it persisted. So everything we just talked about, I can't speak. What that will allow, there we go. What that will allow is that any state that the player had, that's now in memory. It will be the same player that kind of moves from map to map, instead of being regenerated based on the TMX file. And not only that, you'll remember that I dropped some stuff on the ground. I dropped a piece of armor on the ground. I would be able to, because this is the same map, I could go back and see it on the ground. So I think everything we just described is potentially going to work. I think that's the path I'm going to try out, at least to start, and we'll see how things go. Thanks.